And that was the weather, and this is Bao 176 News. Now to tonight's leading story, clinical trials in developing countries, and what does this mean for us?
Thanks, Brian. Now, can you explain to the viewers exactly what a clinical trial is?
Well, Andrew, have you ever thought about where medicine and medical procedures get tested before your doctor uses them on you?
No, actually, I haven't.
Well, that is where clinical trials come in. See, a clinical trial is a research test done on human subjects to help develop a new drug or a new treatment.
I see. And how does that work?
Well, according to the National Library of Medicine, the clinical trials are conducted into four different phases that are each designed to answer separate research questions. Phase 1 researches the safety of the drug and its side effects on a small group of people. Now, if it is found to be safe, it transitions into Phase 2, where it is tested on a larger group of people. Now, following this phase, the drug's effectiveness and side effects are compared to other commonly used drugs to see if it is found to be more effective. And finally, Phase 4 is the final stage used to market and sell the new drug to the general public.
Interesting. So, what's the issue? It seems like a good idea. Well, to further answer this question, let's switch over to our news correspondent in Argentina for more detailed information on why this is big news. Hi, Jessica. So, what is going on there with the clinical trials?
Well, you see, Andrew, there are very few clinical trials going on in the United States right now because of the high costs of Phase 3 clinical trials, which is administering of the drug to large groups of people in order to test for the side effects and effectiveness of the drug. As a result of the expense of doing these tests in the U.S., companies have been performing the trials in developing countries.
So, tell me more about this. Why is this a major issue?
What we have here are these companies that are providing little care and compensation to the participants in the studies.
What does that mean for the participants?
We are seeing stories emerging of death and permanent injury being afforded to participants. In a medical trial that took place in Argentina to test the safety of a new vaccine, Synflorix, which prevents pneumonia, ear infections, and pneumococcal diseases, developed by GlaxoSmithKline, the world's fourth largest pharmaceutical company in terms of global prescription drug sales, at least 14 infants enrolled in clinical trials for the drug died during the testing. Their parents, some who were illiterate, signed their children to the trial without full knowledge or understanding that they were participating in an experiment. The local doctors who were enrolling the patients received $350 per child.
Wow, that seems largely unethical.
Wait, Jessica, you said that some parents who enrolled their children were illiterate? How is that even possible if there is supposed to be informed consent between the subjects and the doctors?
Yes, this is very unethical, but in many developing countries, the laws and regulations around testing are very lax, and the FDA has been historically lax around regulations for US-based companies and agencies doing these tests. So what we have here are cases such as the one in Argentina appearing all over the developing world. And to answer your question, Brian, the illiteracy does not stop doctors from obtaining consent from the subjects. In fact, in some ways it makes it easier to exploit them because they have no idea what it is that they're signing. In the way that the institutions who sponsor the studies get around this issue is by having those who cannot read or write sign with a generic X or using a thumbprint. These people are told to simply trust the doctors, and they are unaware that they're completely being exploited.
Now, before we let you go, Jessica, and shift the conversation toward the bioethics, we have another story from our correspondent Lindsay in New Delhi.
Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Lindsay. I understand you have a story of massive clinical trial done in New Delhi.
Yes, Andrew, I do. I'm at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences here in New Delhi, looking at a clinical trial that has lasted over a 30-month period. The trial is focused on a variety of drugs used to treat everything from high blood pressure to chronic focal encephalitis, a chronic inflammation of the brain that causes epileptic seizures and other neurological complications. During this study, there have been reported 49 infant mortalities, likely caused by the blood pressure medications that were administered, which has previously never been given to anyone under the age of 18. A total of 4,142 children were enrolled in the studies, and 2/3 of these children were less than a year of age at the start of the trial. The head of the pediatrics department at the All India Institute claimed that none of the deaths were due to the medication or interventions used in the clinical trials.
Now, both of you have mentioned death of participants. Do you have anything to say about how to prevent this?
Well, I think it all comes down to informed consent and coercion. These parents are being offered what they believe to be better health care in an area where they would not otherwise have access to medical procedures. In other words, they're drug naive patients who, like I said before, are told to just trust the doctors and expect to get better.
What we are seeing is a repeat of the consent and coercion issue. Unfortunately, this type of clinical trial procedure is not a recent development. Trials like these have been performed since World War II and maybe even further. One great example of clinical trials that have taken advantage of vulnerable populations is the Tuskegee experiments, which happened at home in the United States.
Well, thank you both. I'm glad you mentioned Tuskegee, Lindsay, because we are going to move now to our senior bioethics expert, Hillary, to discuss the relationship of these trials to the policies and agreements made following the Tuskegee experiments.
Hello, Andrew and Brian.
So can you tell us about what these clinical trials mean in terms of bioethics?
Great question. You see, when the Tuskegee medical trials were performed in the United States beginning in the 1930s, there were massive amounts of coercion involved, and the participants in the study were not informed about their condition or even that they were being tested on. In response, the Belmont Report was created.
And what is the significance of the Belmont Report?
The significance is that the Belmont Report specified that there were certain criteria for a scientific experiment with humans to be considered ethical. One of the important elements of the Belmont Report is the use of informed consent among participants. The subjects of the experiment have to know what they're getting themselves into. What we are seeing with these clinical trials are a blatant disregard for the informed consent of participants.
Now, isn't the Belmont Report a US-based report? How does that apply to the trials done in developing countries? Because our data shows that these trials are being done in India, Thailand, Vietnam, some parts of Eastern Europe, Bangladesh, Malawi, Russia, Romania, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Peru, Iran, Turkey, and Uganda.
Well, the Belmont Report is not unique. There are similar documents that are more global, like the Nuremberg Codes created following the Nazi experiments in World War II. These reports and codes emphasize that no harm is to come to the subjects of the experiment and that the subjects have the right to withdraw at any time. Now, what we're seeing in trials happening in countries like India, as your correspondent mentioned before, are severe side effects, in some cases mass deaths, of the test subjects, which directly violates these ethical codes. It also calls into question the coercion element we see mirrored from Tuskegee. These people often don't have access to good medical care, and so they may see this as the only way to get adequate or any health care at all for their children. It is important for us to examine what's going on in these trials for the ethical treatment and safety of these test subjects.
Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Now I've got our legal expert, Allison, online to talk about the FDA's role in all of this. Hi, Allison.
Hello, Brian. Thank you for having me on the show today. As a result of the public's shaken trust in the FDA and other organizations affiliated with pharmaceutical trials, the federal government created and established regulations and guidelines for clinical research so that participants are protected from unreasonable risks. With that being said, it is important to mention that when looking at the FDA's role in all of this, the reason they have not investigated clinical trials overseas is because what is being done in other countries is technically not illegal.
What, really?
Yes, really. The big reason clinical trials from the U.S. move to foreign countries is the loophole in the FDA regulation stating if a study done in the U.S. suggested that a drug had no benefit, trials from countries abroad can be used in their stead to secure FDA approval. If a country even has regulations and policies when it comes to drug testing, they are far less stringent than the U.S. The threat of having any legal process taken against the company in foreign countries is little to none. The FDA does so little monitoring that the companies can pretty much do whatever they say and whatever they want.
Wow, I had no idea this was so lax. But I have a question. How much can the trial results be applied to the United States?
The FDA still questions the extent to which the trials conducted outside of the U.S. can be applied to the people living here. The applicability of foreign clinical trials to people in the U.S. depends on the diseases being studied and the state of current clinical practice in that area. Impoverished people living in other parts of the world metabolize drugs differently than people in the U.S. for a variety of reasons. The diseases in other countries, such as malaria and tuberculosis, can skew the outcome of some clinical trials. With that being said, some doctors and researchers still hold the belief that the globalization of clinical trials are positive and beneficial.
Why is it more ideal than conducting trials in the U.S.?
The cost is the main reason more clinical trials are being conducted all over the world. It is much cheaper to conduct trials in places such as India or Russia because the savings are up to around hundreds of millions of dollars. This can be crucial when the initial cost for a trial is between $300 million to $600 million. For such a large cost, it is no wonder that companies conduct trials overseas. For example, in 2008, companies contracted by major pharmaceutical companies planned and carried out more than 9,000 studies involving around 200 million test subjects in 115 countries. The sales amounted to some $20 billion, according to estimates, which was equivalent to a third of all global spending on drug research.
Well, how does this affect the common citizen in the U.S.? Am I supposed to be worried about all the pharmaceutical drugs I'm taking?
No, don't be afraid of the stuff that is in your medicine cabinet. But with everything else in life, you have to take medication with caution. About 200,000 people die every year from prescription drugs that the FDA has deemed safe. And I am sure that those drugs were tested overseas in underdeveloped countries. With more and more industries moving their trials overseas, it will, however, be tougher to regulate and monitor, which may increase the risk of taking medications.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. That is all the time we have. See you all next time here on Bio 176.
Bye.